You are completely alone, surrounded by nothing but the sound of crashing waves and the endless horizon of the sea. No human voices, no connection to the outside world, and only the harsh elements to keep you company. This was the reality for Juana Maria, a woman who spent an unimaginable 18 years stranded on San Nicolas Island, isolated from civilization. But how did she end up there? What kept her going in the face of overwhelming loneliness and danger? It's the early 1800s, and the world is a vastly different place. Explorers and traders navigate the oceans, indigenous tribes live off the land, and whispers of gold and riches lure adventurers to the far reaches of the world. But while many sought fortune and fame, Juana Maria was left with a fate no one would wish for: to be completely cut off from humanity. In this story, I will reveal how she came to be marooned on that desolate island, how she survived when everything seemed stacked against her, and the incredible journey that finally brought her back to the world she had left behind. Our journey starts in 1835 with the Native American tribe known as the Nicoleño, the original inhabitants of San Nicolas Island, a remote landmass located roughly 61 miles off the coast of Southern California. For generations, they had lived in harmony with their environment, thriving off the island's rich marine life and using its natural resources to build their homes, tools, and clothing. But everything changed when fur traders set their sights on the island's abundant otter population, sparking a violent conflict that would forever alter the Nicoleños' fate. It was the ruthless arrival of Russian and Alaskan fur traders that ignited a battle over the island's resources. These traders, armed with guns and weapons the Nicoleño had never seen, raided the island, seeking to wipe out anyone who stood in the way of their profits. Within a few years, the once thriving Nicoleño tribe was reduced to a mere handful of survivors, their population decimated by disease, violence, and the relentless pursuit of profit by the traders. By 1835, only a few members of the tribe remained, and the decision was made to evacuate them from the island in a mission organized by the Franciscan friars of the Santa Barbara Mission. As the evacuation began, tragedy struck. During the chaotic departure, Juana Maria, who was likely only in her 20s, was somehow left behind. Some say she returned to the island to search for her missing child. Others believe she went back to rescue a relative or pet. Whatever the reason, when the boat left, it did so without her. Imagine that moment, the sound of the oars fading away, the sight of the only boat drifting out of reach, and the realization that she was utterly and completely alone. It's a thought that sends chills down the spine. But for Juana Maria, this was the beginning of an 18-year-long fight for survival. From that day forward, Juana Maria faced the harsh reality of surviving on San Nicolas Island. With no one to rely on and no hope of rescue in sight, she had to quickly adapt to her new life. Her first challenge was finding shelter. She was no longer just a member of a tribe. She was now the sole inhabitant of an unforgiving and desolate landscape. Using materials left behind by her people, she constructed a small shelter made of whale bones and brush, a structure that offered protection against the island's brutal winds and relentless sun. Hunger was her next great enemy, and the island offered few easy options for sustenance. Yet, the skills she'd learned from her people proved invaluable. Juana Maria became an expert forager, collecting shellfish, seabirds, and fish from the waters surrounding the island. She hunted seals and sea otters, using their meat for food and their hides for clothing and warmth. At times, she even crafted intricate fishing hooks from abalone shells, showing a remarkable ability to innovate and adapt even in complete isolation. But as the years dragged on, the isolation wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Imagine what it must have been like, going months, years, and eventually decades without hearing another human voice, without sharing a single word or a smile. It's the kind of solitude that could drive anyone to madness, yet Juana Maria endured. Every day was a battle against not just the elements, but the crushing loneliness that came with being the only human on an island lost to time. She sang to herself, creating songs to ward off the silence, her voice the only sound breaking the stillness of the nights. But as hard as she fought, the question remained, would anyone ever come back for her? Would she ever be reunited with the world she once knew? As the years passed, the fight for survival became Juana Maria's daily reality. San Nicolas Island was no paradise. Its harsh conditions pushed her to her limits, testing both her physical and mental endurance. The weather was unforgiving, with winter storms that would lash the island, bringing torrential rain and howling winds. During these times, Juana Maria would have to strengthen her makeshift shelter, using whatever materials she could find, whale bones, driftwood, and dried brush, to reinforce her home against nature's fury. Despite being exposed to such brutality, she persevered, demonstrating an extraordinary level of resourcefulness. But it wasn't just the weather that posed a threat. Water was scarce, and she had to become incredibly inventive to gather what she could. Using abalone shells, she would collect rainwater, and during dry spells, she would dig into the sand to find underground springs. It's believed she even managed to construct primitive clay vessels to store the precious liquid. Food, too, became an ongoing challenge. With no crops to harvest and limited access to traditional sources of food, she became an expert hunter and gatherer, relying on the ocean to provide most of her sustenance. Juana Maria hunted sea otters and seals, using the blubber for fuel and their skins for warmth. She learned to recognize which shellfish were safe to eat, collecting abalones and mussels from the rocky shores. Her knowledge of the sea and its tides grew so precise that she could predict when the waves would bring fish close to the shore, allowing her to catch them with her bare hands or using the nets she crafted from plant fibers. This self-taught ingenuity ensured her survival, but it came at a cost. The constant struggle to find food and water must have been exhausting, and any miscalculation could have meant the difference between life and death. She wasn't immune to danger from the island's wildlife either. Sea lions and wild dogs roamed the shores, and one wrong step could result in a vicious encounter. But she learned to navigate these dangers, always alert and ready to defend herself if needed. Despite the overwhelming odds, Juana Maria refused to surrender, and it was this unyielding spirit that allowed her to endure. It wasn't just about surviving each day, it was about overcoming the fear and isolation that threatened to break her spirit. Each passing year represented another victory, another testament to her will to live. But how long could she continue this fight alone? Would she ever find a way off the island that had become both her home and her prison? In the midst of such isolation, one might expect Juana Maria to succumb to despair, but somehow she managed to maintain a sense of hope and connection to a world she hadn't seen in years. It's said that she spent much of her time singing songs and prayers in her native tongue, holding on to the cultural traditions of her tribe, even though she had no one to share them with. These songs became a lifeline, a way to keep her spirit alive and remind herself that she wasn't entirely alone, that she was still part of something bigger. She crafted intricate jewelry and clothing, using whatever materials she could find, such as bird feathers, shells, and animal bones. These weren't just items of necessity. They were symbols of her identity, reminders of the rich cultural heritage that had been taken from her. It's possible that she even spoke to herself, telling stories, recounting memories of her family, and maintaining an internal dialogue to preserve her sanity. This self-expression, in a way, allowed her to retain a sense of humanity, even when there was no one around to acknowledge it. On some days, Juana Maria would walk along the island's cliffs, gazing out at the ocean, watching for any sign of a ship. She must have felt a mix of longing and fear, the hope that someone would come to rescue her, and the dread that she might never leave the island. But she never gave up. Instead, she continued to build and improve her surroundings, creating a life for herself in the most desolate of places. The isolation might have been crushing, but she found solace in the rhythms of nature, in the sound of the waves, the cry of seabirds, and the wind that swept across the island. These elements became her companions, and in them, she found a way to stave off the madness that often accompanies prolonged isolation. One can only imagine how she marked the passing of time. Did she scratch tallies into the bones of her shelter? Did she collect mementos from each passing season? The reality is that no one will ever know the full extent of her internal world during those years, but it's clear that she managed to retain a sense of purpose and identity despite the crushing solitude. And perhaps it was this unbroken spirit, this refusal to let go of who she was, that kept her alive for so long. But would all her years of survival and hope be enough to change her fate? After 18 long years, in 1853, the unthinkable happened. A rescue party arrived on San Nicolas Island. It was a group of fur trappers and Captain George Nidover, an American sea captain who had heard rumors of a lone woman living on the island. These rumors had circulated for years, but many had dismissed them as mere legends. Now, however, the legend was about to become a reality. When they finally discovered Juana Maria, they were astonished. She greeted them with an energy and excitement that belied the years of solitude she had endured. Dressed in a skirt made of cormorant feathers and surrounded by the tools and weapons she had crafted, she looked more like a figure out of mythology than a real person. But there she was, flesh and blood, alive after nearly 2 decades of isolation. Her survival was nothing short of miraculous, and the men marveled at how she had managed to endure such hardships for so long. Juana Maria didn't speak Spanish or English, and the language of her people had long since disappeared. Communication was difficult, but they managed to convey that they were there to take her back to civilization. It must have been overwhelming for her. The thought of leaving the island that had been her entire world for so many years. Yet, there was also hope, a chance to reconnect with humanity after spending so much time alone. She was taken aboard Nidever's boat and brought back to the Santa Barbara mission. There, she experienced the marvels of a world that had moved on without her. The sound of bells, the sight of horses, the warmth of a fire that wasn't kindled by her own hands. It must have been both a joyful and bewildering experience. The people who met her were amazed by her resilience and the grace with which she carried herself, despite the years of hardship. Sadly, Juana Maria's story did not have the happy ending one might hope for. Just 7 weeks after her rescue, she fell ill, likely due to her sudden exposure to new diseases, and passed away. But even in death, her story continues to captivate and inspire. Juana Maria's extraordinary tale of survival is a reminder of the strength of the human spirit, the power of hope, and the resilience needed to face even the most insurmountable challenges. Juana Maria's life remains shrouded in mystery, even to this day. Historians have tried to piece together the puzzle of her existence, but many questions still linger. How did she truly survive all those years alone? What stories would she have shared if her language had been understood? The few belongings she left behind, like her handmade clothing and her tools, offer glimpses into her life but can never fully tell her story. The legend of Juana Maria, the lone woman of San Nicolas Island, has grown over time, and she has inspired countless retellings in books, articles, and even films. What do you think about her incredible journey? Could you imagine surviving even a fraction of what she did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel for more amazing content, and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on another incredible story.